Obviously, Trump's tariffs remain the main topic of the week. The week of mutual tariffs is officially coming. President Trump has declared Wednesday National Liberation Day. On this day, tariffs of over 20% will be imposed on 25 countries. Trump also adds that reciprocal tariffs will be introduced with all countries that already have tariffs on American goods. The projected volume of imported goods to which these tariffs will apply is approximately $1.5 trillion by the end of April. Only by the end of April. Now imagine what will happen from April until the end of the year. We will be talking about tariff goods worth many trillions of dollars. Let's see which countries will fall under these measures. Because there are several countries that have particularly serious trade differences with the United States. These tariffs will be imposed on aluminum, steel, cars, medicines, and so on. Tariffs on all goods from China will also increase, and this is the most important point. Here, however, Trump adds that some indulgences are possible as part of the TikTok deal. In addition, the US administration will focus on the 10 or 15 countries with the largest trade deficit in trade relations with the United States. Back in February, Trump signed a memorandum that instructs us trade representatives to work out the maintenance of tariffs separately for each country. This means that these measures have been prepared for several months, and the culmination should come on the 2nd of April. I think that's why we're going to see very important statements from Donald Trump on Wednesday. Last week, there was speculation that some tariff plans may be revised towards easing, and in some cases, tariff rates will be lower than those that other countries charge the United States. So, I'm still looking at this whole situation from the point of view that Trump is using tariffs as a tool for negotiations and pressure. Let's focus on this moment. This map shows what tariffs different countries impose on American goods compared to what tariffs the United States imposes on their goods. It should be borne in mind that we are talking about average tariff rates for all categories of goods and not for their individual types. In this diagram, you can see free trade zones. They are highlighted in dark green. These are Canada, Mexico, some countries of South America, Australia. Then there are countries with higher tariffs. That's pretty much everything else. Dark blue, light blue, red, and orange. For example, the countries marked in red have tariffs that exceed the US by 5 to 10 percentage points. But this does not mean that all of these countries benefit at the expense of the United States, because a lot depends on specific sectors. Steel, cars, food, and so on. That is why, most likely, we will see a more detailed individual approach to each country, which will be announced on the 2nd of April. However, it's worth remembering that one of the key reasons why Trump chose this path of tariff wars is reflected in this chart. It shows the latest US trade figures in comparison with China. If you go back to the 2000th year, you can see that the United States was actually leading in world trade, but 20 years later, China almost took the position of a global leader, and the United States allowed this to happen. Now, I think Trump is just trying to carry out a kind of repatriation of industrial production, that is, to bring it home so that the expression "Made in America" means something again. The only question is what price the market will pay for it. How much more short-term pain, which, by the way, Trump was talking about, is waiting for us. So I'll move on to the next point. China, Japan, and South Korea have already said they will respond quickly and decisively. Mexico has already announced that their response will follow on the 3rd of April, literally the next day. And we will immediately see whether this will lead to numerous trade wars. And here it is important to understand that trade wars directly affect the market because they create uncertainty. And the uncertainty in the economy is now at the highest level in the entire history of observations. And when such uncertainty reigns in the economy, investors exit risky assets and stocks. That's why we see bond yields falling and gold rising. This can also be seen by the fact that there is a big gap now between the capitalization of Bitcoin and altcoins. If investors consider Bitcoin a risky asset, then altcoins are even more so. Now I want to show you a small fragment of the video. It will reveal in more detail the relationship between Trump's personality and his policies. The stock market is not an economy, but it is a very clear indicator of opinions. It is obvious that many institutional and retail investors believe that the current economic course is bringing us closer to a recession that we should not have had. Donald Trump has effectively isolated himself from feedback and criticism that could point out to him that his tariff policy is not the best strategic path for American industry and global relations. Trump is a New York realtor. He likes to make loud, spectacular statements, and then he uses these loud statements to conduct personal negotiations, during which he can achieve personal influence, money, or ego satisfaction for himself. I think that if you look at the first results, at consumer sentiment, the stock market, the yield of 10-year bonds, you can see summary economic data that tells us that the economy, consumers, employers, and investors do not approve of what is happening. This will be a very interesting test case. Perhaps the Trump presidency is a kind of right-wing version of abundance. And this, in my opinion, is an important question. Isn't Donald Trump just pursuing his own version of the abundance policy? And even if we disagree with his methods from an ideological point of view, should we hope for positive results of his actions? Yes, the short and medium-term consequences are already clear. This is chaos in the market until everything settles down and investors satisfy their uncertainty with clear answers: what, how, and with whom will be done. But in the long run, this process has two possible outcomes: success or failure. And I think this is a key moment for the entire Trump campaign. But even more important is how it will affect the future of the entire Republican Party. It is this moment that causes the greatest number of questions. It is long-term success or long-term failure that will affect this. He spoke more deeply about this than firm Polychipicius. I accidentally stumbled upon one of his interviews, and I want to share an excerpt from it. Listen to what he says. Trump had an interview with Larry King in 1987. Nick, find him, please. At the moment, we don't have free trade. If you want to do business in Japan or Saudi Arabia, it's almost impossible for Americans. In fact, there is no real free trade right now. We think we have it, but we don't really have it. Now, the complexity of this situation is that after 20 years of globalization and a distorted version of free trade, it has become incredibly difficult to create a new system without unexpected problems. These domino effects can include inflation, retaliatory tariffs, and a consumption tax. All these difficult questions remain unanswered so far, but the structural logic of tariffs is not to punish one country more than another, but to create a balance. If you charge us 5%, we charge you 5%. If you charge 10%, we charge 10% too. And this is the main proof that Trump has actually come to the point of no return. He is so actively promoting this policy that if it doesn't work, it will completely destroy his presidency, and perhaps even his political legacy. From an economic point of view, failure can lead to a recession, which some say should not have happened. Goldman Registry Office, for example, predicts a possible recession. The key point is here: probability. Previously, it was 20%, but now it has grown to 35%. This is a very serious leap. Goldman also lowered the forecast for US GDP growth from 2% to 1.5% this year. And in the same forecast, Goldman assumes 3 interest rate cuts by the US Federal Reserve. Goldman now expects the C's core personal consumption expenditure index to rise to 3.5% this year, rather than the 3% they predicted in earlier projections. But at the same time, which is very strange, they predict that the Fed will cut rates 3 times in the second half of the year to compensate for the blow to GDP growth and employment. As for me, there is no way the Fed can cut the rate at a base rate of 3.5%. However, this may happen if a recession is inevitable, if the US Federal Reserve refuses to lower the rate. Goldman also predicts the cost of the S&P 500 at the end of the year is no longer 6,200, but 5,700. And that's enough for people to start worrying about how all this will develop further. Now, we need to think about who will suffer the most from this in the short-medium term. This is likely to be an American consumer. This is where the fun begins, because this moment will be a key factor for Trump's election campaign and for his political future. So, the LAP budget predicts that the increase in tariffs for China, Canada, and Mexico may lead to the fact that household spending on the same goods will increase by $1,600 and even $2,000 a year. But here's a more concrete example. Listen. The main blow from the price increase caused by tariffs will fall on American car buyers. Let's look at the data for last year. The average cost of a new car is almost $50,000. The average monthly payment on a car loan is more than $780. This is already a very large sum. If there are 2 cars in the family, Then it takes about $1,600 a month just to pay for them. Now imagine that 25% is added to this. Some goods will completely rise in price by 25%, and some goods will have to rise in price. Only for certain parts of these goods, but prices will still skyrocket. 4 to 1% in the next 5 to 10 years. And this is the highest figure since 1993. Even before the crisis of the 28th, inflation expectations were not so high. This will be a huge challenge for Trump and the entire US economy, and in the end, Trump will have to decide whether his current policy will be a long-term strategy or something that will last only for the next 18 months. No one can say for sure whether Trump's attempt to completely transform his country will succeed, but we know for sure that this attempt was inevitable. This is also what Larry Finkus BlackRock says. According to him, the United States should take control of its public debt. The US budget deficit continues to grow. This problem also needs to be solved, and if this is not done, the US dollar risks losing its status as the world's reserve currency. This has been talked about for many, many years, but if the dollar loses this status, the main question arises. And what will replace it? What's the alternative? There can be 3 of them. For example, other currencies. Macron says that the euro can replace the dollar as a reserve currency, but it seems unlikely to me, given that Europe has its own problems. The second alternative. These are Bitcoin or digital assets. And we see Fidelity creating its own stablecoin, and even Trump's Walt Liberty Financial creating its own stablecoin. For example, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy recently bought Bitcoins for $1 and $9 billion again. Someone liked it, and someone started talking again about the fact that MicroStrategy is the next FTX. Time will tell which of them is right. However, the collapse of the MicroStrategy, admittedly, can greatly damage Bitcoin. And finally, the third alternative to the dollar as the world's reserve currency is good old gold. And we see on this chart how the accumulation of gold by the United States of America has jumped. All of these options are now being actively discussed because of the possible consequences of Trump's policy for the coming years. So the question is everything that happens a temporary pain for the sake of long-term gain? Personally, I think so, but I could be wrong. In the coming weeks, months, and even possibly a year, the market may experience high volatility and shocks. But listen to Tom Lee. Is it worth accumulating assets now? Yes, I think it's worth it. Bitcoin traditionally did not show growth until the end of March. The Fed and central banks will eventually loosen their policies, and the quantitative tightening program will be over. All of this can create a positive fund for Bitcoin's growth. And my goal for Bitcoin is $150,000 or higher. It's hard to believe now, but when the market loses sensitivity to tariff wars and gets used to them, positive signals may appear. I agree with that, but so far we don't know how much time it will take. Uncertainty is the key factor for the market today. It is this factor that will play a decisive role in the future. If you look at the S&P Index 500, it has already reached a new low in 2025 year, a decrease of 11%. This is a very serious drop, especially for such an instrument as the S&P 500. Many American investors, owners of combat and investment funds and retirement accounts, now look at their portfolios in a completely different way, and they blame only one person, Donald Trump, and his tariff strategy. His day of liberation. It was this decision that brought down the markets. But in addition to this, there is another important factor. This is the department of Elon Musk's dogs. It also now affects all these processes. Listen to what Elon Musk says. We wanted to call it the Government Efficiency Commission, but the internet suggested a better name. The Department of Government Efficiency. That's why we called it that. But there are no plans to use Dogecoin in the government. In other words, Dogecoin will not be involved in government structures. But will Elon Musk use other blockchains to increase government transparency? This now remains a big mystery. Many expected that he should have already somehow outlined this topic and proposed a technological solution like Dogecoin. But so far he has not done so. Will blockchain be a part of the future US financial system? I think yes, there should be. So, we are facing a very unstable time. Politics is changing, the world order is changing, the economy is under pressure, markets are falling, investors are worried. Of course, when big changes of epochs are coming, there can be no other way. But I see these times as a good opportunity. We buy when the fear and greed index is below 10, and sell when it is above 75. For $70,000, I will buy Bitcoin. For $62,000, I will buy it even more. The lower the price, the bigger the position. This is a kind of dollar averaging. Even if for many at these moments, these decisions seem strange. Many people can't sell when the market is euphoric. How so? I'm selling, it's growing and growing. I don't want to miss out on these profits. Many do not want to buy a tax because how is it, it falls and falls, but I will lose absolutely everything. And you need to break this psychology in yourself if you want to achieve results. Because if you do everything exactly the same as everyone else, then you will have the same result as everyone else. What do you think about this? Is this a temporary pain for the sake of long-term growth? Or is Trump's policy going to fail, which will lead us to disaster, recession, and even a new depression? Write your opinion in the comments. Well, we'll see you in the new videos. See you soon.